Vikings fans, this is exactly the kind of week that can change the way we look at this team before the season even gets started. There are some huge matchups coming, and honestly, a few things happening behind the scenes could tell us a lot about what this offense and defense are really going to look like when the games start counting. So stay with me, because there's definitely something worth watching here. And if you're ready for Vikings football, hit that like button and drop SKOL in the comments. Let's see how many Vikings fans are here. The most revealing part of the Minnesota Vikings preseason may not happen under the lights at all. It could happen in a practice field against a Baltimore Ravens defense that is capable of exposing every weakness the Vikings are trying to hide before the games start counting. And there is one particular storyline that makes Wednesday and Thursday far more important than two ordinary training camp sessions. Kyler Murray and Justin Jefferson finally getting the kind of extended work together that they desperately need before Week 1. The Vikings and Ravens are scheduled for joint practices on Wednesday and Thursday, with both sessions taking place at noon. The value here is obvious. Instead of seeing a limited number of preseason snaps, Minnesota will get extensive opportunities for 11-on-11 work and best-on-best repetitions against another NFL roster. The transcript describes Baltimore as a high-level organization, making these practices a serious measuring stick for where Minnesota stands heading toward the regular season. And the biggest individual storyline may involve a quarterback who will not even take the field in the upcoming preseason game. Kyler Murray is expected to sit out Saturday's preseason matchup, according to the information presented in the transcript, meaning the joint practices become even more important for him. Instead of using the preseason game to build chemistry, Murray is expected to receive a significant workload during the practices. That puts the spotlight directly on his developing relationship with Justin Jefferson. This is where things get really interesting for Vikings fans. The question is not whether Jefferson is talented enough to produce. We already know what he can do. The question is whether Murray and Jefferson can develop the kind of instinctive connection that works when a defense knows exactly where the football is supposed to go. The transcript argues that this connection has not received enough attention compared with the discussion surrounding Minnesota's running game, yet it could become one of the foundational pieces of the offense. There is an important reason for the urgency. These practices are being portrayed as the final major opportunity for Murray and Jefferson to work together against a legitimate opponent before Minnesota's Week 1. When meeting with Green Bay, Jefferson is not expected to play in preseason games, while Murray is also expected to be held out of the upcoming preseason contest. That makes the two Baltimore practices particularly valuable for timing, communication, and trust between quarterback and receiver. And there is a previous example from Murray's career that makes this even more fascinating. When DeAndre Hopkins joined Murray in Arizona, the chemistry showed up immediately. In their first game together, Hopkins caught 14 passes on 16 targets for 151 yards. The transcript uses that relationship as a reference point for what could potentially happen with Jefferson in Minnesota. Hopkins and Jefferson are described as receivers with several similar traits: elite route running ability, the capacity to create separation, and the ability to win contested catches. That does not mean history will simply repeat itself. In fact, the same transcript acknowledges that the Murray-Hopkins connection was not as effective during their final 2 seasons together. That makes the early development of Murray and Jefferson even more important. Minnesota cannot afford to assume that elite talent automatically creates elite chemistry. That has to be built through repetitions, adjustments, and trust. The bigger offensive picture is also becoming clearer. The running game is expected to be a major part of Minnesota's identity, but the transcript argues that the Murray-Jefferson connection needs to become the other piece of the foundation. On 3rd and 5 or 3rd and 7, when the Vikings need a dependable conversion, the offense needs a quarterback and receiver combination that can execute without hesitation. Baltimore is almost the perfect opponent for testing that theory. Jefferson could be challenged by a secondary featuring Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins, with Chidobe Awuzie also mentioned as part of Baltimore's defensive backfield. The transcript expects Baltimore to use one of its top safeties over the top in certain situations, potentially involving Kyle Hamilton or Malachi Starks. Those names are correctly identified in current Ravens coverage, and the Ravens officially list Hamilton and Starks together in their safety group. That creates the exact kind of challenge Minnesota needs. Jefferson is going to attract attention. Defenses routinely have to account for him beyond the first defender, and Murray has to learn how to work through that coverage without simply forcing the football into a crowded area. The transcript specifically points toward the challenge of getting Jefferson involved even when Baltimore uses double coverage or additional help over the top. So, the real test is not simply whether Jefferson makes a spectacular catch during practice. Vikings fans should be watching how quickly Murray identifies the coverage, how comfortable Jefferson looks adjusting his routes, and whether the two can repeatedly create successful plays against Baltimore's best defensive personnel. But that is only one side of this matchup, because on the other side of the ball, Minnesota is about to get its own massive test. Brian Flores is preparing to face Lamar Jackson, and that matchup could reveal just as much about the Vikings as anything Murray does. The transcript points back to Minnesota's previous meeting with Baltimore and argues that Flores' defense performed extremely well against Jackson. It also emphasizes that Minnesota's problems in that game were attributed elsewhere rather than to the defensive performance. Now Flores gets another opportunity to attack Jackson. But there is an additional layer that makes this matchup even more intriguing. Declan Doyle. Doyle is Baltimore's offensive coordinator and current play caller, after previously working under Ben Johnson in Chicago. Baltimore officially hired Doyle as its offensive coordinator in February 2026 and noted that he had served as Johnson's offensive coordinator in Chicago, where Johnson handled the play calling. That gives this practice a fascinating coaching battle. The transcript identifies Flores versus Doyle as a major matchup because of the success Ben Johnson previously had against Flores' defense. The idea is that Doyle could draw from concepts he experienced during his time with Johnson and use those principles to test Minnesota's defensive structure. That is an interesting tactical storyline because the fight is not simply Flores versus Lamar Jackson. It is Flores trying to solve an offense being designed and called by Doyle. And then there is the physical test waiting for Minnesota's running game. The Vikings are coming off a preseason performance in which the rushing attack had encouraging moments, including a strong showing from fullback Max Bredesen. But Baltimore represents a dramatically tougher examination. The transcript specifically highlights Nnamdi Madubuike, Travis Jones, and Calais Campbell as major pieces of the Ravens' defensive front. Those names are correct, and Baltimore's own current roster coverage identifies Madubuike, Jones, and Campbell among the key defensive line players. That means Minnesota is about to find out whether its rushing success can translate against a front built to stop the run. And that is where this week could become much more revealing than the preseason scoreboard. Can Minnesota create movement against Baltimore's interior defensive line? Can the Vikings consistently get downhill? Can the offense stay ahead of the chains while defenses focus on Jefferson? And perhaps most importantly, can Murray and Jefferson establish enough chemistry for the Vikings to trust that connection once the regular season arrives? That is what makes these two practices so important. Now I want to hear from you. What do you believe is the biggest storyline in these Ravens practices? Kyler Murray building chemistry with Justin Jefferson, Brian Flores going up against Lamar Jackson and Declan Doyle, or the Vikings trying to run the football against Baltimore's defensive front? Tell me your answer in the comments, because this week could give us one of the clearest early indications yet of what this Minnesota Vikings team really has. So now I want to hear from you, Vikings fans. Do you believe Kyler Murray and Justin Jefferson are going to build the chemistry this team needs before Week 1? And do you think Brian Flores and this defense are ready for the challenge Baltimore is bringing? Drop your take in the comments. And if you're confident in the Vikings this season, let me know what you think this team's ceiling is. If you enjoyed the breakdown, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next Vikings update. There's a lot more coming, and this week could give us some very important answers. SKOL Vikings fans.